Hello, beautiful friends. Welcome to my channel. I'm really glad you're here. Today, we're going to be talking about anger, trying to discern what it can teach us, how we can sit with discomfort to listen to anger more clearly, to resist postures of defensiveness, which often make us hold anger at an arm's length, and to instead work to be more receptive to the needs of those around us, to affirm people's hurt and pain, regardless of the tone with which it is being expressed, and to fight against a politics of politeness, which tends to unjustly silence the voices of those who have legitimate reasons to be angry. So, speaking candidly, I'm not a very angry person. It's not a feeling that comes naturally for me. I tend to internalize my frustrations toward myself, deepening my own self-hatred more than I will turn my anger outward to the people responsible for my trauma. I think a lot of this has to do with the ways in which I was so thoroughly conditioned in a Christian culture that strongly reinforced a politics of politeness. But it is something I am honestly struggling against, because an inability or unwillingness to feel anger in the face of injustice is pretty much just complacency. I don't believe that making people uncomfortable is always the wrong choice. I don't believe that anger inherently yields aggression or violence. And while I am not suggesting that our anger should go without interrogation or prompt us to react rather than respond, I do believe that there is real value in anger as a motivating force. But anger is what I, and probably many people, would categorize as a difficult emotion. It's not something many of us enjoy feeling, and it's certainly not something we hold much space for socially or collectively. Because America seems obsessed with maintaining a normative status quo, with preserving the illusion that everything is working well, displays of anger that are not in service of preserving those norms tends to become incredibly suspect and make people uncomfortable. Like public displays of grief or sadness or anxiety, we tend to hold displays of anger at arm's length when we see it manifesting in people around us. It evokes in us a knee-jerk defensiveness because it risks compromising our own comfort or security. And being that so much of society is constructed on preserving the image of comfort and on avoiding things that scare us, bore us, or make us uncomfortable, then anger tends to fall into the category of emotions that we hold little space for, and either explicitly or subtly meet with stigma and shame. As with all things, there are degrees to which we stigmatize anger depending on the context in which it is being expressed or the person who is expressing it. But generally, people do not seem to respond well to anger. It tends to evoke in us feelings of defensiveness. And this is a damn shame because some of the most important messages we could convey to one another, some of the most important conversations we could be having really merit and perhaps require space for anger to be expressed. But so often, this idea that anger makes people defensive has been used as a justification for tone policing. There's this particularly waspy, Eurocentric idea that discourse must be civil, and that in order for messages to be heard, they need to first conform to certain standards of palatability. That instead of placing the social burden on those who feel uncomfortable to sit with their discomfort, interrogate it, and begin to work through it, we tend to place the social burden on people delivering their message to make sure they don't step on anyone's toes. Indeed, this is the basis for respectability politics, that conformity is a prerequisite for being taken seriously. That if you want to change the system, you need to first adhere to its rules. And tragically, I believe that in an American context, there is something frighteningly true about this. And this causes many people to be silenced when their message is that the social rules aren't working for everyone. Because we have yet to incorporate any real social awareness of differences in power, and because people in power are rarely willing to sit with discomfort, much less concede their power, a lot of people have been made to feel as if incremental change that doesn't rock the boat too much is the only way to be heard. But requiring that a message be free of anger before it is heard only perpetuates injustice and gaslighting. Oftentimes anger, especially collective anger, indicates sincere hurt or insecurity that is in many cases incredibly legitimate and worth our time and attention, regardless of how it is packaged. I am incredibly thankful for people who use their anger strategically and intentionally, because I don't really believe in the effectiveness of respectability politics, certainly not if it is the only method we are employing to achieve justice. And while I believe that some small victories might have been won by negotiating with respectability politics, I think it's important to recognize that the people fighting these fights have had to put up with a great deal more bullshit than they ever should have had been expected to. For people on the margins of society, often what is personally necessary requires negotiation with harsh social realities, realities which are inherently unjust. But any victories secured by people who did things the polite way should not reinforce the idea that change is possible if we work within the system. Rather, it should challenge us to recognize precisely how high we have set the stakes of conforming. That people are willing to consistently stifle their legitimate anger just for the sake of continuing to survive, because they need to eat, because they need to keep their job, because we have structured a system where refusal to play the game risks one's own survival. And so sometimes, in order to keep fighting, we have to value our own survival over dismantling the systems that oppress us. I often think about this in relation to my own gender. While I yearn for a world where the gender binary did not exist, where I or anyone could walk down the street wearing whatever we want and not risk our lives, this is not the case right now. So I often feel pressured to negotiate with norms, to pass as a trans woman for my own sanity or survival. But I never desire for my passing to be interpreted as consenting to the gender binary. Rather, I desire for it to be understood as a further testament to the injustice of a system which demands that I pass, that I pick a gender in order to survive. It is not my job to dismantle the entire system of transphobia. I contribute to its dismantling with my very existence. Similarly, when anyone facing injustice concedes to the established norms, i.e., squeezing their anger into a more palatable tone, this negotiation should not be understood as consenting to the system, as affirming its norms, that if some people can find success this way, then the system must be fine. But rather, these actions further attest to the fact that while we need to dismantle systems of oppression in order to create an equitable world, that we also have other needs, that we cannot fight these fights alone, and that oftentimes negotiating with norms and challenging them where we can is the best we can do on a day-to-day basis if we hope to survive. But we cannot separate respectability politics from normative violence, because norms are always violent and always privilege people who already hold more power. These are the forces that cause women to apologize for contradicting someone, even when they know that what they're saying is correct. These are the forces that label the work of street artists as illegal graffiti, while Banksy's works are hailed as artistic contributions. Respectability politics contribute to normative violence because our norms are racism, sexism, classism, ableism, and so on. And exclusively fighting for justice within these norms cannot undo them. In the words of Audre Lorde, the master's tools will never dismantle the master's house. And policing people's tone by expecting that their anger be filtered into a polite complaint or a legal strategy is a perpetuation of injustice. And it's time we start recognizing it as such. And on a collective level, we require more radical strategies. Riots and revolutions, public displays of anger, are, historically speaking, often the forces that really get things moving. We can imagine a world where these were not necessary if all of us, especially people with greater privilege or power, worked to intentionally undo the social norms which make people feel the need to squeeze their frustrations into a balanced tone and a smiling face. But this is unlikely to happen. If people demonstrate themselves incapable of even holding our anger, it is incredibly unlikely that they will find the willingness to deconstruct social norms which are serving them well. What's worse is that, while we hold very little social space for displays of anger, we of course allow more space for those with more privilege. And often these fall along lines of race and gender. For a white man in power to be angry can be seen as motivating, incentivizing, getting results. But if a woman is angry, she is seen as bossy or a bitch. And if that woman is black, she quickly becomes an abject stereotype, the sapphire, descending from a character in the Amos and Andy Show, a radio and television sitcom created and originally voiced by two white men, which ran from 1928 to 1960. Thanks to this incredibly offensive caricature, Black women are now often falsely labeled as angry for words or actions which would never be perceived as such in other populations. And this anger becomes a systematic excuse to further undermine what already diminished authority and voice Black women might hold. If you're interested in learning more about these stereotypes and how they play out, how they affect the lived experiences of Black women, you can find a couple links to other videos in the description of this video, and I encourage you to watch them, especially if this is something you were not aware of before watching this. This is a double bind of injustice because people who lack social access or protection have the most legitimate reasons to be angry. But so often, their anger, our anger, prevents us from being listened to. And this must change. People speaking from a place of anger are often speaking from a place of real honesty, or at least from an honest understanding of their own experience. This does not mean that everything said in anger is true. Your racist uncle or homophobic grandpa are not justified in their perspectives just because they are angry. But their anger likely comes from a place of misguided insecurity, a false perception of the world which puts them on the defensive. Messages delivered with anger should not prevent us from interrogating their truth. However, a true message should not be excluded from conversation just because it is angry, and this is often what happens. Maintaining politeness as a prerequisite for the place at the table has been used as an excuse to silence those who have suffered immense abuses. But what can we do? Well, we can learn to be more comfortable with the presence of anger. We can learn to recognize the distinctions between individual anger and collective anger. Whether someone is angry at us or just around us, we can learn to listen to their vulnerability and work to enter into that vulnerable space with them. We can hold people accountable when they perpetuate harmful stereotypes about anger in marginalized populations, particularly in Black women. We can fight against respectability politics by continuing to fight against norms and by holding more space for people who look, think, and speak differently than we do. And when someone says something that makes us uncomfortable, rather than throwing our guards up and blaming them for our discomfort, we can work to assess how much truth might be behind their claims, regardless of the tone with which they are conveyed. So I'll leave you with a meditative phrase you can connect to your breath to help you learn to sit with anger, to be less defensive when it is targeted toward you, so you can more accurately assess whether there is truth you can, and indeed should, hear behind the anger. And it goes like this. So on the inhale, think to yourself, anger is an invitation. And on the exhale, to listen more closely. Anger is an invitation to listen more closely. Anger is an invitation to listen more closely. If you're feeling brave and vulnerable enough to share any response you had to today's reflection, I would love to hear from you in the comments. And if you enjoyed today's video or it meant something to you, please like and subscribe. Your support means a great deal to me as I want to provide reflections which speak to you. And thank you for watching. I wish you peace and perspective. I love you all as I love myself, as we are part of the same world. And I look forward to talking with you again soon.